very exciting too. We are just blessed in Seattle that we did all the earlier research. It was readily available. So Dave from Sayona is here today. I think it might be available, but they are awesome. So, for instance, I have a patient, she moved to New York and she still sees me virtually once in a while. And she, of course, had recurrent disease, and I recommended a Sayona pad. She's like, what? And actually, I emailed them, said, hey, guys, you have a patient in New York. This sounds crazy, but can you please look up where it's available in New York? And they gave me the locations. So I think they are trying very hard to make sure it's available everywhere. And it's not as hard. It's the same as the FDG pad. The only difference would be you want to make sure the tracer.
We are live streaming Valarie Worthy's presentation, our co-founder's presentation from the Best of Breast Conference in Florida today. And she's about to come on in a couple of minutes after this presentation. I'm going to share our screen and bring her on. So please watch her.
Thank you all. Final session of the day. Thank you again for joining us for this conference. It's been amazing. Our final session is going to be a panel discussion on patient perspectives. We're joined.
Seems that they are between presentations, and we're hoping it's going to come back online in a second.
Just real quick, so this is the slides, and the question should come up right here. To moderate the patient perspective panel. I was so excited to do so because truly I think that patient perspective is probably the most important piece of the puzzle when it comes to treatment and it comes to survivorship. It's what should be responded to, what should be learned from, and what should be thought of most of all. So in a moment, I'm going to introduce our esteemed panel, but just real quick, a little bit about the Florida Breast Cancer Foundation. We have offices in Miami and Orlando. And our mission is to end the suffering caused by breast cancer. I can tell you our board of directors, circling back to what I just said, in our bylaws, it says 1/3 of our board of directors have to be breast cancer survivors or related to someone who is a breast cancer survivor. We also have amazing researchers and other amazing folks, but without the advocates and without the experience, the compass would be so much less. So I'm going to ask you to go to floridabreastcancer.org or all our social media sites, if you would, to learn more about us. And right now, I would like to introduce our esteemed panelists, a group of women rather, with varied experiences and a wealth of knowledge. So Janice, we'll begin with you. Just tell everyone a little bit about yourself and why you're here today.
Sure. Thank you, Tracy. My name is Janice Cowden. I was originally diagnosed with stage 1 triple negative breast cancer in 2011 with a stage 4 metastatic recurrence in 2016. had a complete response to my first line of treatment, and I've been no evidence of disease for a little over 5 years now. I am a patient advocate. I do research and peer support advocacy, and I'm very honored to be here. My background is in nursing also, which makes the research advocacy a little bit easier for me. Thank you.
Holly. Hi, my name is Holly Kane Tritchler, and I am also a breast cancer survivor. I was diagnosed with stage 3 HER2 positive breast cancer in 2015, and it's been quite a journey. I finally have gone a full year without any sort of surgery or something happening, so I'm very grateful to one of the few people that had a good 2021, probably. I am part of the Central Florida Breast Cancer Foundation, and we founded it to offer financial assistance to people in the Polk County. I'm from Lakeland, Florida, so in the Polk County area, Central Florida, to help them while they're going through treatment, to help with things, whether it be rent or payments on a car, things like that, when they're having to do that. By trade, I'm actually a journalist. I'm a sports writer, and I can tell you during the midst of all of my treatments that made for a very interesting combination, trying to travel and cover things as well. But I'm very honored to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And Valarie.
Yes, I'm happy to be here as well. I am a 22-year breast cancer survivor. I'm diagnosed with stage 2 estrogen receptive breast cancer. God, it doesn't seem like it's been 22 years, but it has. By trade, I am a nurse as well. I'm a nurse navigator at Duke Cancer Center, and I'm also a co-founder of Touch. It's a Black breast cancer organization, and what we really want to do is get out in the community, educate women on clinical trials. As you know, very few minorities get involved in clinical trials. So I want to be the face, and so does our CEO. Ricky wants to be the face of what it looks like to be a part of a clinical trial, and also just bring awareness to our communities.
Well, that's wonderful. And I'm actually taking this opportunity to get to know these ladies, because I think we'll all be working much closer together down the road, I hope. You know, power in numbers. I have to say too, I have to confess, Holly, after you mentioned your background, I also have a background in journalism, in television, but I'm a little sheepish because I spent the entire introduction leaning into the microphone, only to realize I think I forgot my past roots. I have a lavalier. Anyway. All right, so we actually put together a slide deck, and these women, along with myself, we tried to pick out all the hot topics, the biggest hot topics, if you would, from patient perspective. What can we talk to you all about here in this room and online, and cover the most ground? So by trade, I am not technologically savvy, so let's see how this will work. Oh. Down here? Oh, see. Easier. Maybe. Okay. Okay, good. I'm going to go back. Let's see. I'm actually going back to this for a moment, because when we put this picture originally in our slide deck, it was all women. And then we had a few sessions on the phone and Zoom, and we realized, wait a minute, men get breast cancer too. So we added a few men, and I can speak for my organization. I'm sure all of you as well. This is a big focus, and we're trying to do much more to envelope men as well into all that we do. Hard to break old habits there. Okay, patient perspectives, distress. Highest distress, before diagnosis, after diagnosis, before and after each treatment modality, completion or ongoing treatment. I'm going to go back to our panelists here, and can each of you talk about what your thoughts are regarding those high distress areas? We could begin. Want to begin on this end next time? This time, okay.
So as a nurse navigator at Duke, we do what I think all cancer centers do, is have our patients to complete what we call a distress thermometer. And when they collected the data all over everywhere, we know that those touch points were high touch points. So for me, when I was diagnosed, just thinking about what would the diagnosis be, the treatment, all of that, I know that my stress level was just off the track. And then after I was treated, gone through all of my treatment, and there was no more treatment left, I was like, is there anything else I can take? Is there any, I mean, I was distressed about that. So I think during our entire journey, there's some level of distress that we all feel.
I would certainly agree with that. I was diagnosed at the age of 48, and I still had 2 children at home with me, one in just starting high school and one in middle school. So it was not only myself receiving the diagnosis, but how do I let my children know? How do I have them handle it? And then real quick, a funny story. After I had taken or had the biopsy to find out if I had it, my oncologist called to tell me, you know, you need to come in. We have to do the news. I need to talk about it. We need to let you know what happened. And I actually had the wonderful opportunity to ask if I could delay it, because the day she wanted me to come in, I was supposed to go to the White House with one of the athletes I cover. So it was kind of going from that real life of being on a real high to knowing that when I got back, it was going to be, I knew it wasn't going to be good news. So.
Right. So to delay it as long as possible, which is the most anti-intuitive thing we can do.
Yeah.
Janice.
Well, since I've sat on both sides of early stage breast cancer as well as metastatic, I can say when I was first diagnosed with stage 1 breast cancer, I had no family history of breast cancer. So it came as quite a shock. And my nursing background really didn't help me, because I spent the majority of my career working in pediatrics, and we just didn't see a lot of patients with breast cancer. So I knew enough about it to know that you know, it was something to be concerned about. I was relieved that it was early stage. However, I was distressed that it was triple negative, because I knew enough about triple negative to know that, you know, the prognosis was not good and that the recurrence rate was high. So I had, you know, I went through the lumpectomy, partial breast radiation, chemotherapy, and I'd had a mammoprint done, and it said that I was high risk for recurrence. So for me, the first 2 years following my treatment for early stage breast cancer was just fraught with, you know, constant fear of recurrence and anxiety. And, you know, I didn't understand why they didn't want to do scans to find out, you know, I knew my mammograms were good, but what else? So time went on, and, you know, typically with triple negative, if you're going to have a recurrence, most often it occurs within the first 2 to 3 years after diagnosis, early stage. And I went 5 years, and my oncologist and I had just gotten to a point where we were both very comfortable thinking, you know, I'm at that tail end of that curve. It's going to start going down. My risk is going to start going down. And then I was having some bone and joint pain that ended up being unrelated to cancer. I did not have bone mets. It was from a bone strengthening drug, but at 5 years, my oncologist suggested, well, let's just do a PET scan. I don't expect to find anything. And there it was, and we caught my disease very early. But I think, you know, when we first put this slide deck together and we were going over them, you know, it's some things that we added. And one of the lines on this slide was completion of treatment. And I said, but wait, in the metastatic community, there is no such thing as completion of treatment. So sometimes, you know, sometimes there's a wide variance between early stage and metastatic disease. But I think with metastatic disease, there's always the fear is constantly there. We have a saying, you know, scan, treat, repeat, because that's basically our lives. And so we go through periods, you know, before every scan, there's scanxiety, or if you have reliable tumor markers, you watch those go up over time. And it's just a constant source of stress and anxiety. And not only that, because treatment is ongoing, you deal with the toxicities and the side effects related to treatment as well. So I guess our stress level wanes and waxes in the metastatic community, but it's rarely completely gone.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting. I mean, many of you probably know, but 30% of breast cancer cases do come back. It's a big number as metastatic. So it's something. Point. Yeah. Let me ask you ladies something. If you can look back now at your old self when you were diagnosed, what would you tell her?
I'll go first on that one. As far as the metastatic diagnosis, I would tell her that it's not an immediate death sentence. looking at the prognostic factors for metastatic triple negative, I assumed I'd probably have about 2 years, maybe 3 years if I was lucky. And none of us expected me to have a complete response to my treatment. So I think don't look at the statistics and don't assume that you will fit within the statistical parameters, because you are as unique as your cancer is, and no oncologist can put a calendar date on your life, because even they don't know how you will respond to treatment.
Anyone else want to share?
Say that after the diagnosis, it's not a medical emergency. So when you listen to your doctor, go home and think about it and talk to other family members. I think that we have to respond immediately when we do have time to make an informed decision. And sometimes our decisions are emotional because they're so fast.
Right.
So that's what I would tell probably my younger self.
That's good advice. Holly, did you have any thoughts?
What I would tell myself is kind of what I did end up doing, and that really was kind of trust in my doctors and the people that know more about it than I did. And that turned out to be helpful and remains to be so. That's a very good question. What would I tell myself? I don't know exactly.
Well, it's interesting. So in disclosure, I am not a breast cancer survivor. Breast cancer is in my family. Pretty much every woman, not my mom, but every other woman, and all survivors except for one. I'm at high risk though, and I have a 7-year-old, and I look at her all the time and think, geez, what would it be like if I didn't have to worry about this? And I only bring that up to say, you might be wondering why I don't share, first of all, my experience, but also to say that all the folks that I had to help take care of, and all the folks that I come into contact in my current role, and these wonderful women, it's interesting because it's just a confusing moment when you get that diagnosis. I've heard women from all walks of life, all races and creeds say that same thing. My little cousin was diagnosed, and her doctor, she thought, walked her through all the steps. And when she went in for her mastectomy, she woke up shocked and panicked and frightened. And that was the traumatic experience, because she felt herself completely flat. Her doctor either didn't explain it well enough, or she was just in shock and couldn't understand it. She thought that she would wake up and be reconstructed. And I don't know how that was missed in our conversations, but it was. And he had talked about an expander and this and that, and she didn't realize the process. Anyway, and I just say that because I think it's important. Sometimes if you're not in it, you think, well, I'm smart, I'm educated, I would understand it. Not necessarily the case. It's confusing and it's shocking and it's scary. So another thing that people always tell me, would you agree, bring someone with you for that moment so they can hear it?
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm going to move on to our next slide here. All right, every 3 minutes, a woman in the United States is diagnosed with breast cancer. Every 3 minutes, which is why we're all so passionate about what we do. The mortality rate for Black women diagnosed with breast cancer is 42% higher. The mortality rate for Black women diagnosed with breast cancer is 42% higher than the comparable rate for white women. Most often, the case is that that's because of late stage diagnosis, lack of access to equitable care and education. But I'm going to open it up to these women if you would like to share more from your perspective about why that is the case.
So I think one of the things that when people have an idea that breast cancer would kill you, then that increases the fear. And so people delay getting mammogram screenings. And then again, it is access and a lot of other things. So I think it's important to me as a survivor, as an African-American nurse, to go out into the communities and put on a different face. This is what cancer looks like. This is what cancer looks like, a person looks like after treatment. Those kinds of things, I think, are important in the African-American community. There's not enough of us that are survivors that are going out. And so that's why it's vitally important for me in my church, in my communities, in organizations at large, to put on that face of, I hope I look healthy and okay, but yeah, to put on that kind of face.
I could not agree with you more. Valarie, or I'm sorry, Holly or Janice, do you want to also weigh in?
Well, I would say probably the thing that really set me back was I got lazy and I quit going for my mammograms. So I hadn't had a mammogram in probably 3 years before I was diagnosed. And, you know, I just keep wondering, had I gone earlier, would we have caught the cancer earlier, how that would have been. So, you know, referring to how often people are diagnosed, I just know with my diagnosis, that was a big thing. It was very late when I got diagnosed.
Well, you were in the sports reporting world, so I know how busy your life is, and that's what we do, right?
Yeah.
We're busy, our job, our kids, our husband, everyone else but us.
Yeah.
Janice.
What I can add to this conversation, especially about the disparities in cancer care and access to treatment and so forth, I serve as a metastatic mentor for a couple of organizations and a helpline volunteer for Living Beyond Breast Cancer. And they do peer matching. So they only match me with someone who is metastatic. And oftentimes it's somebody who's metastatic triple negative. And in my personal experience as a helpline volunteer with Living Beyond Breast Cancer, I've been matched with older, well, my age,
Wiser.
African-American women. And what I found with these women that I was mentoring is that often during our conversations, they had told no one about their diagnosis, and they weren't planning on telling anyone about their diagnosis. So they had a lack of support, and they felt this shame. And then they also had this enormous amount of mistrust in the healthcare system for good reasons. But it was very difficult for me, being as white as I am, to understand those cultural differences that exist. And, you know, one of the things I think that we're trying to do in all of the nonprofit organizations that I'm affiliated with is we're trying to make sure that we are as diverse as possible, and so that we can serve a very diverse population as well. But what we have found, and I have a dear friend who had a survey called the Become survey through the Metastatic Breast Cancer Alliance, and all of us advocates were tweeting and sharing on social media, trying to get African-American breast cancer patients to complete this survey. And we struggled to get 100 people over, it was at least 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a lot of cultural issues and barriers that need to be broken down. And people like Valarie and Ricky Fairley, you know, they are the face. And it starts with us.
It does. I have to agree. Not to use this opportunity to promote my organization. That's not the point of what I'm about to say, but I will say also, we have a program called MASS, and it was actually started by a breast cancer survivor, unrelated to Florida breast cancer, and then they enveloped her in, and it's focused completely on that. And it's through the churches, primarily in the African-American communities, but also Hispanic and other underserved areas. And it's all about education and then teaming up with the Florida Department of Health to provide those mammograms. Yes.
Yes, at UM, we have a mentoring program in which we think, you know, the women that like to do it, and encourage them, you know, to be part of that, because there's nothing like testimonial. I know I'm 16-year triple negative breast cancer survivor, and you know, and I'm a nurse practitioner in oncology. So what helped me the most when I got diagnosed with shock was one of the mothers in my child's school, who I didn't tell anybody in that section, totally working full time and trying to get her through the private school and all that. It was that she found out, probably from my child, and she called me. I didn't know her at all. And she told me, you know, I'm in this path, you're doing neoadjuvant, I did it already, this is what, you know, I've done that, and you're gonna be fine, and I worked throughout the whole thing. It was the most wonderful phone call I ever received.
That's wonderful.
So I definitely believe in the work that you guys are doing, and since then, I used to be in GI cancer, so I switched to, for the past 15 years, breast oncology, because I feel very strongly that having gone through
I'm so glad you shared that. Well, first of all, congratulations to you. And second of all, I would say the field is so lucky to have you, right? Because you bring both sides of it. So thank you so much. I love sharing. I think there's great power in sharing experience. So this is what this is about today. Let's go to the next panel. So patient perspectives, weight, and weight. Mammogram, biopsy, diagnosis, treatment, survivorship. Janice, let's talk about this a little bit.
Well, it is true. And like Valarie said earlier, I think when you get your initial diagnosis, most people want to rush to get, because they feel this fear that the longer they wait to get these things done and to get started on treatment, the cancer is just going to grow and grow and grow, which isn't necessarily always true. But it is, and in the metastatic community, I think one of the worst things for us as patients is because we get scans and tests done frequently on a regular basis, when we don't get the results, I mean, some people get a lot of anxiety leading up to having their scans done. Mine was never getting the scan done. It was that time frame between having the scan done and getting the report.
Right.
And, there are some patients who will say they've had to wait a week, 2 weeks to get scan results. And for me, that's completely unacceptable. So I think that's a problem. As far as, going a little bit farther in this slide to survivorship, one of the things that is missing in the metastatic community is survivorship care and survivorship plans. They kind of exclude us. And I think it's, in some ways you would understand that because it is terminal and incurable, but we still, as patients are living longer, I mean, we've heard through the conference, as some patients are living longer with this disease, it's very important to have established survivorship care plans for those patients. And because we are on constant treatment, getting palliative care, which a lot of people don't have access to deal with the side effects from treatments. We have ongoing side effects that can be debilitating. So we want that quality of life in our survivorship care plans.
I think tell me if you would all agree, but in 2019, Governor DeSantis declared Metastatic Breast Cancer Awareness Day. It was April something.
It's October 13th.
Okay. I remember I had just come on board and we held an event at Carrabba was one of our sponsors. And we talked a lot about this and kind of just the interesting change in collective thought that metastatic breast cancer, it's about not so much the cure, but about living with and thriving with, because now we know 30% of cases come back. So to your point, I think there's a little lag in the catch up, right? Of the programs. Yes. We have to look at it differently.
Absolutely.
Anyway, would either of you like to weigh in as well?
I think that there's always a waiting period. So even after treatment is done and you go back for your, what I call our surveillance mammograms, just the fear then, but I think across most cancer centers now, for those of us that are diagnosed with breast cancer, when we get that mammogram, we don't have to go back home and then wait for the letter. We actually get the letter before we leave. I honestly don't know what I'd do if I had to wait for the letter, because we waited the entire course of our treatment. Now, I will say that one good thing is you learn how to do meditation or whatever kind of stress reducing strategies there are, but there is so much weight in this journey.
Right. Okay. I'm assuming Holly. Okay. Just want to make sure. Okay, the journey. Speaking of the journey, so the doctor-patient relationship, information overload, fear, making informed decisions, and support systems. I just ran down that list, but they're each in and of themselves pretty big topics and pretty big important topics. Let's start with the first one, doctor-patient relationship. And how do you go about choosing your doctor? And maybe the idea that, I always go back to a story, one of a good friend of mine now, actually a breast cancer survivor, told me about her doctor and just a lot of frustration early on, but she stayed with this person because he's a doctor. But you have to, just like everything else in life, you have to find the right fit, right? And somebody who speaks your language. Anyway, you would know better than I. Can you please, one of you, weigh in on that?
I'll weigh in on that. I agree and have been very blessed to have great oncologists that I'm very grateful for. But when it came time after I had my mastectomy and we had to figure out on the rebuild and things like that, the plastic surgeon that I guess had a relationship with the oncology department, they kind of sent everyone to. I remember that she had me sit down for 30 minutes before we spoke, and she basically did a whole slide of all the things that could possibly go wrong. And it freaked me out so much. I was like, maybe this isn't going to be the best fit. And I saw somebody else, and he, as it turns out, I've had to have a lot of reconstruction. And I will say that that doctor-patient relationship is so important. I mean, to the fact that they would, text me and check on me and really care. And I think that is, personally, I think that's the most vital, important part of the whole situation, has been that wonderful relationship that I've been able to have, and hopefully others can too.
And it's interesting. I mean, that doctor running down all the things that could go wrong might work really great with someone else's personality.
A lot of people use that doctor. So I felt like a bit of a rebel, but I didn't.
I think I'd be a little more like you, just my nature. But you're saying you, so you'd like to know worst case scenario.
I am empowered by knowledge. And so for me, I want complete transparency with my doctor. And maybe having a background in nursing and working with physicians changes that a little bit. But I know a lot of patients who have no background in, healthcare, and they expect the same thing. They expect transparency. And I think the doctor-patient relationship, the number one thing is trust. And I think if you have any misgivings about the doctor that you've selected, because oftentimes it happens, like Holly said, we get referred to our oncologist because going about your normal life, if you've never had cancer, you don't know which oncologist to go to.
Right.
So we need that referral sometimes. But I think one of the things too is communication. And I think open communication, but I think also the physician, it's important for them to understand their patient and know what level of communication is acceptable for that patient. Some people want to bury their head in the sand and stay there. I am the opposite of that. So, and I think the other thing that we always recommend, because about 80% of breast cancer patients, or maybe 80% of cancer patients, receive their care in a community cancer center. And so for those of us who are metastatic, we often encourage other people to get a second opinion. Even if you love your physician, if you're at a community cancer center and your oncologist is a general oncologist rather than a breast specialist, go get a second opinion. It never hurts. The more eyes on you, the better. Absolutely. And if you are with a doctor who does not want you to get a second opinion, then you should probably run from that doctor.
I think that's great advice.
Yeah.
But the main point here is advocate for yourself.
Yes.
Every single step of the way. No one's going to care about you more than you. No one's going to know you more than you. Valarie, I think you had something you wanted to say.
I did. I think the thing that I probably did wrong my first visit was I had on my badge, and which read that I was a nurse. And I think sometimes we, even nurses, assume that someone with a medical degree knows more than we think that they know.
Right.
And so my doctor began speaking in the medical language that I wasn't familiar with. And so finally I had to say, I don't understand that because I've never been an oncology nurse, but we have a wonderful relationship. He was here for the conference, and he couldn't believe it was 22 years. But I think that first visit, you have to be transparent and you have to tell them what your fears are so that you can work together on this plan. Because it's nothing crazier than someone giving you a plan and you have no idea why this is occurring. and what you're going to do and what part you play in this whole treatment strategy.
That relationship probably would not have turned out as well if you hadn't been candid.
Absolutely.
So it's interesting how that works. Information overload and fear, we've talked a bit about that, as well as making the informed decision, having someone with you, taking a moment to breathe. But let's talk about support systems. So clearly all of us, our organizations, what we do, there are those support systems. There are a lot of support systems out there. A lot of folks do not realize this. I mean, there's help for everything. Living expenses. We're about to do our educational grants. By the way, we are about to do our educational granting cycle, FYI. Scientific research. There's all sorts of help out there, mentoring. But ladies, what's been most instrumental in your worlds during your journey?
I'd say talking to the nurse navigator or the social worker, because they have a list of support systems, and then knowing who your family, your friend, your circles of influence is very, very important.
I'll agree.
I would agree with that. I also think, you know, especially in the metastatic community, social media is a wonderful place to go for support systems. And I know there are some physicians who, you know, kind of warn their patients away from that, but there's really good information that comes from this, and peer support is just vital. And I think, you know, I'm representing Living Beyond Breast Cancer here today. And when I was diagnosed, I had a wonderful family and friend support system. But to be honest with you, I'd never met anyone living with metastatic breast cancer. And I hadn't joined any social media groups or anything like that, just hadn't reached out. And so I went to my first metastatic breast cancer conference about 9 months after my diagnosis. And I had applied and was accepted into LBBC's Hear My Voice program. And that just opened up a network of other advocates, other patients living. I walked into a room with about 300 to 400 other people who were mostly living with metastatic breast cancer. And I was completely overwhelmed in 2017. So I think the support is there. I think you just have to know what's a good fit for you. You know, not everybody likes the social media support groups, some, especially if they don't want to know information, you know, and it's hard because we have constant loss. You know, we're losing 114 to 116 people a day just in the US from metastatic breast cancer. So it is something that you will encounter is loss. And so I think you have to be aware of that when you seek out your support system.
Absolutely. I agree with that. I know some of the folks in our fold that you probably know, you know, we have a board meeting once a month and they'll get on and often there's that. There's also a lot of hope and a lot of good stories, but there's that.
I just real quick would add that when I was initially diagnosed that the Breast Cancer Central Florida, the organization did not exist. And so myself and 2 other women really kind of formed it together. And what we've been able to make is something that now is a very helpful source, whether it be someone to talk to, whether it be, you know, referencing different places that can help them. But certainly that group has been, I've watched it be helpful for so many other people, and that does make a big difference. There's absolutely no doubt, because and also just, it sounds simple, but you know, just your friends really step up. I mean, the way they helped me and my children, whether it was giving them rides to soccer practice or bringing meals. I was so sick during my chemotherapy, I literally did not eat. But they would bring meals for my family. There was no way I was able to get up and cook. And so it just sounds like such a simple concept, but it really made all the difference.
I'm glad you guys all have that support. Every once in a while, we come across someone who, for whatever reason, I don't know, you know, they just don't. And it makes you really value, and it makes it really important for organizations like what we do, right? For those folks. Okay. Yes. Oh, good. Perfect segue. Because one of the things that stood out to me, we were on a call about a week ago, and we talked a lot about this. So when you look at support systems, cheerleader, trusted friend, yes, all that. And it looks great and it sounds great. But some of you did take issue with those cheerleaders. Would you like to share why?
So I guess I'll lay the groundwork. So when you're going through a cancer diagnosis, you meet so many different people. You have that trusted friend or caregiver you hope that's going with you to write down everything that you forget. You also have this person in your life, I think everybody does, that they'll either give you a gift or they'll cook soup because that cures everything. And then you have this one person that's the cheerleader. No matter what, I mean, no matter what, this person is always positive. They're always saying good things. I'm either praying for you, I'm sending good thoughts your way, that person. And so when it comes to you making a decision, you always gravitate to that person that made you feel good. It's not the one that comes with you to write the notes, but it's the cheerleader. So we ask the cheerleader, what do you think we should do about this? The cheerleader does not give us good information. We get angry with the cheerleader and we wonder, why did she give us good information? Because she's the cheerleader. And I say to a lot of my patients at Duke, have you ever watched a football game, basketball game? Have you ever seen the coach go to the cheerleader and say, what's the next play? No, you haven't. And so the cheerleader's just that. I mean, they're the ones that they're cheering you. If you're losing, if you're winning, they're the cheerleader. But Janice had a different kind of slant on that.
I definitely did. I was the one who had the exception to the cheerleader. I think for those of us who are metastatic, what we often encounter with the cheerleader is there's a level of positive toxicity that comes along with that sometimes. And what it can do, you try to tell them your fears or your concerns, and they're legitimate. I mean, they're your feelings. Feelings are never wrong. But some people don't want to hear it. It's like, oh, you've got to stay positive. Well, you know what? Positivity makes it easier to get through each day. It makes your days a little bit more fun or nicer, but it's not going to change the outcome of my disease or anyone else's disease. And to use that toxic positivity on someone, it basically invalidates their feelings. If you want to talk to somebody and say, I'm really scared, I've got this incurable disease and I have, this going on, maybe I'm 35 years old and I've got young children and I don't want to leave my children and I'm really scared. And somebody says, oh, you're going to be just fine, and uses that toxic positivity, and they're the cheerleader. Basically, they don't want to hear your feelings because it's about them and not about you. And those are the kind of people that, we either have the cheerleaders in our lives that just negate every feeling that we have that's, valid and concerning. But then we also have the people who ghost us when we're diagnosed metastatic because they don't know what to say. So you've got those two opposite ends of, so they just quietly go away and never say anything to you because they don't know what to say. And sometimes it's best just to say, I don't know what to say.
Right. Yeah, the ghosting, but also organizations that all of us belong to, we also are there to help the caregivers. And so caregivers can seek information. What do you need to know and how can you help? So I just bring that up in case you find yourself in that situation. Direct the caregivers to our organizations as well, so that we can better help. Okay, guys, so informed decision-making. And we talked a bit about this already: lost, confused, unsure, perplexed, bewildered, disoriented. But I feel like I can ask all you, I can't see the folks online, but after hearing from these women, less so, right? Less so if you come across someone who gets this diagnosis. Some really good information here and things to do. Don't have to be lost, confused, perplexed. And if you are, you have somewhere you can go to share those feelings and get some direction, or at least some camaraderie. Patient perspectives: life after treatment, treatment never ends. This is, I found this very interesting, and I do hear this from folks that are in our fold. Survivor's remorse. There's chemo late effects, nutrition, exercise, recurrence, but the survivor's remorse. Just recently, we had an event at one of our offices at a mall in Orlando, and we had a woman come in, and we had one of our research partners there, kind of a Q&A corner. She came in and shared her story of survivorship, and it was a great story, her whole journey. Then she broke down in tears and started to talk about these overwhelming feelings of why did I survive? And that was a whole different sort of conversation. Would you ladies like to weigh in on this in any way?
Janice?
I can certainly weigh in. You know, in my circle of metastatic triple negative, I'm rather a unicorn, I guess you could say, because most people don't have the experience that I've had with it. And so for me, I do often struggle with, I call it survivor's guilt or thriver's guilt, because I'm literally watching my friends die left and right, not just from triple negative, but from metastatic disease. And many of them are young, under age 40. It's really hard. And so this is something that I deal with all the time. And I know when I first got out of my training at LBBC's Hear My Voice, we lost our first class member, which we had 25 or 27 class members within 3 weeks after our training. And then we proceeded to lose 3 more within the next few months, and then 6 within the first 6 months. And that was my first experience of losing someone that I knew personally. And I was still less than a year out from diagnosis. And I honestly, I was paralyzed with just the grief, you know, that I was struggling with. And this went on for about the first year. And I think once I really got fully into advocacy and figured out what my purpose was, as far as, you know, both being a research and a peer support advocate, what I've learned to do over the last 5.5 years or so is just take that grief, which can be overwhelming. I've lost 4 friends under the age of 40 in the last 4 months. And and I knew these people. And it can be devastating, but what I've learned to do is take that grief and channel it into productivity. So I use it to help other patients, other people. And that really has served me very, very well. I still grieve over my friends when I lose them. And, but at least I can take those emotions and I can kind of channel them into something that doesn't paralyze me.
Absolutely. Do something with it.
Yes.
And you two are doing the same.
Yeah, absolutely. I think though, when you look at chemo late effects and nutrition, exercise, when you're in that survivorship piece, you're not quite sure what to do. And again, if we go back to survivorship care plans, they seem so generic and they're not personalized. So when it comes to like having taken endocrine therapy for 10 years and then having cognitive deficits, but then you can't share that with people because you're alive. So everything for non-cancer patients, the fact that you're alive and they don't look at quality of life, sometimes you struggle in those places because people don't understand how quality of life really is important. And it's just the fact that you're alive. So you lost your hair. Well, there are wigs, but people don't really understand like the struggles along the journey, even though you are alive.
Of course, I think we could all, even outside of the breast cancer realm, that's just right. Any disease. I just go back to my news days doing stories, you know, any sort of disease, there's that. Because if you're one of the lucky ones that survives, then you feel like you don't have the right, perhaps, to struggle along the way. And that's not really healthy thinking, and certainly isn't fair for people to look at it that way. Holly?
I would definitely agree with that. I ended up having a stroke as because of one of the drugs I took after my treatment that I had to take. And my doctor was like, it had never happened at my cancer center. No one had ever had that kind of a reaction and things like that. My point in this is I still am kind of recovering. I mean, the stroke did damage to me and I still have to work through all of that. And so every day at some point, I'm reminded that the reason I can't remember whatever it was, I mean, my short-term memory is horrible. If I've already told you this story, I apologize. But I mean, just little things like that, you know, I wish all of it could be gone and I could kind of move on. And yet there's always that something that makes me think about it. And so I just think that's one of the things that, whether it be having that problem that I did or others, I mean, it's really that ability to go on and feel that hope again, which is something that is huge.
Well, I'm imagining, I'm speaking for all of you now, but getting to know you over the past few weeks, I feel like all of you do feel that hope, which is a real testament to your ability to take a situation and to turn it into something, well, I don't mean to sound positively toxic, but to turn it into something positive, useful to others, which in turn is useful to yourself. I'm always fascinated by that. Why can some people do that and others cannot? I don't know. I mean, that's a different conversation for a different day, I suppose, but I'm always inspired by folks that can, and hopefully you inspire those that are struggling trying to do so. So I guess I'm trying to say thank you. Thank you for sharing all that.
I often hear people say, I would never have guessed you had cancer or
Right.
a stroke or anything. And I'm like, well, that's a compliment. I'll take it.
It is a
that
compliment.
makes me feel good at thinking.
It is. I mean, we have somebody, one of our advocates, well, like you all, 24 years, when she was diagnosed, she had a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old and was told that she would not be here a year later. 24 years. Yeah, you know her. And okay, well, that's interesting. Her name is Terlisa. She would not mind me saying so. She's become the face. She's been on national television shows. She is a ray of light. If you saw her, you would never in a million years imagine what this lady has to do, the continual treatment and what she deals with. But anyway, like you all, just another inspiration. So, okie dokes. I can go on, but someone's going to wrap me here soon. So, okay. So patient perspectives, newly diagnosed, mature survivor, oncologist, family, friends. We've been talking about all of this the whole way. So, and thoughts about cancer. I love this slide. Valarie, you put this together, correct? So you.
Yeah, I just kind of went online and I looked for people's thoughts about cancer.
Well, these are great. It's a great way to wrap up the presentation. So your life is your story. Write well, edit often. You can't control what happens to you, but you can control the way that you handle it. What do you want your story to say? Oprah, surround yourself with only people who are going to lift you higher. There is no time for negative energy during cancer. You need to be around people who inspire, but also challenge, to Jeff's point, and make you better. And the last piece, Valarie, did you create that?
No, I didn't. I just have to take credit for it.
Oh, it's so good. So cancer is a word, not the entire sentence. I think that's been made abundantly clear. So thank you to all three of you for sharing all of your experiences so candidly. Thank you all for listening. I will say our online audience is out there, and I have a couple of comments. So we'll begin with these, and then I'll open it up to questions here. But this came in from someone who didn't share his or her name, but said, this is an excellent topic to cover as a breast cancer patient and so extremely helpful. You have touched on very important topics. I thank you. Good stuff. And then Kimberly Cobb, I apologize, Kimberly, this came in a few moments ago and I was not looking, but it said another program that is starting to expand nationally is Unite for Her, a wonderful program for breast cancer patients. So thank you, Kimberly, for sharing that with us. That's good information to get out. Is there anyone here that has a question? Yes. Well, thank you. Now that's great. Thank you so much. We appreciate you and we're so happy that you're here and you're doing well. Anybody else? Yeah, please.
I feel like patients are still just as scared seeing these orders that they need, but how do you feel about it?
Okay, before we answer, I've just been advised to help our online audience a little bit because they can't hear the questions so well. So a question just came in regarding wait times and how to, and I apologize because I was talking to her, but I think essentially how to understand what's being told, where to get that information. Is that correct?
It's more about access, when patients now have access to the report.
Okay.
I mean, that's a new law that we have access to the
Yes.
report, often before our oncologist has discussed the report with us. So some patients, and my response to you would be, that is very dependent upon the patient. For myself, I mean, I also have an oncologist at MD Anderson. So my protocol is I go there every 6 months. I get my labs done, get my scan done. I go to medical records about 2 hours after my scan, pick up my report and my disc, and then I go see my oncologist. For me, it's very important to have that information before I see my oncologist. And the reason it is because for the most part, I understand the terminology in the report. I am not every patient, and not every patient is like me. And I think it really is dependent upon the patient's knowledge base and what they would understand. We get that all of the time in our social media support groups. People will actually post screenshots of their scan results, and they'll say, what does this mean? And then they rely on, because we have nurse practitioners, we have all kinds of skill levels and knowledge levels within our support groups. And they just want to know, is this something I need to be concerned about? But I think that varies individually from one patient to the next. Holly may not want to see her report before
because I don't have the medical background.
Right.
And so, what am I imagining it means?
Exactly. And I know people who don't have healthcare backgrounds, but as patient advocates, or especially research advocates, those of us who, really dig into the science behind the disease, we do understand what the terminology means, but not everybody may be equipped to handle if it's bad news. What do I do with this? For me, it helps me to go into my appointment informed, and that way I know I can plan ahead. These are the things that I want to ask about, or these are the topics that I want to discuss with my oncologist, because I go in with the knowledge of what it said on my report. And I had a PET scan that had a suspicious lung opacity in December. So I sat there and looked at the report, and then I did all of my research on what, a ground glass opacity, would possibly mean. And so I was beyond the, oh my gosh, it's the first non-NED PET scan I've had in over 5 years. I was beyond the stress part of it, like, oh my gosh, I've had a bad scan. I was able to get through that and then work through what does this mean and research it, so that by the time I got into my appointment, we were able to have a discussion that wasn't fraught with fear and anxiety and stress for me.
I just think we should have an option of whether we want that information or not.
Right.
Because I am a nurse, but I don't want that information. I don't want to have to figure out anything before I talk with my oncologist. So I just wish there was an option that if we wanted it, yes. If we don't, no, and we can wait and talk to our oncologist.
We often tell people, who are in our social support groups, if you don't want to know, don't look in your patient portal. Don't pull that scan up. Because for Valarie, she wouldn't want to pull that scan up.
Correct.
For me, I would want that knowledge. So, I mean, you do have the choice just because it's there and it's available. If you are not the kind of person that wants to know that knowledge, or you don't think you would understand it, don't look at the scan report. It's pretty simple.
But I bet a lot of folks assume they have to. There's always this assumption, right?
But it wasn't available really until just more recently.
Right.
So until the oncologist released it, you didn't have access to that report.
But now that it is, I think that's good information to say, don't look if you don't want to.
Yes, if you don't think you'll understand it, don't read it. Or if you are very, very high anxiety and you think it would cause you a lot of fear, whether you have a healthcare background or not, if it would cause you a lot of fear and stress, don't look at it.
Right. Any other questions? Okay, and I did have one other comment come in from our online audience. As a navigator, how do you help a highly anxious patient who tries to control the workup timeliness by going to multiple people who can get her in faster? It actually ends up slowing things way down.
It actually does. And I think it helps that I am a cancer survivor. And so I think in sharing my story, that helps a lot. But I get an awful lot of patients that, oh gosh, they go to everyone. And it really does delay our progress in terms of appointments and who's talking to who. But I think when I share the story, and at least what I see that my journey has been successful and how it was successful, that helps a lot of patients.
Okay, and we have 2 minutes. I hear you, I see you coming. I see you coming for me. But I wanted to share this, kind of circling back to what we began talking about when we showed the picture of the male. We always see these, and it's always daughter, sister, mother. And yes, that is so true. But it's also our fathers, our brothers, our sons. And I think that's important, especially from organizational standpoints. This is broad appeal. This affects all of us. And I think power in numbers. So anyway, thank you so much again. If we can do anything for you, any of us, please reach out. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. All the information about all of these incredible advocates organizations are available online, both as part of the app that you're working on and also, or working with, and also on our website. Thank you again for rounding out day 2. It's always so important to have the patient voice, because I think a lot of times we lose sight of the fact that we're learning a lot about data that's going to change the way we treat, but there's this disconnect with how much the patient can and will want to know. And so from hearing these patients, it's been wonderful.
We love you. Get home
To
safe.
really understand that that's
Thanks
something
for
that
joining us
continues to be
today.
informed decision and shared
Take care.
decision.
We'll put this on our
So
YouTube
thank you
channel, too.
again. Thank you for a beautiful Best of Breast conference. We're so happy to be back. We're so happy that you all joined with us at this time. We look forward to the